6 months ago, I made a video on how the government fiscal spending is directly responsible for the inflation in this country, as well as the most aggressive rate hiking cycle, which was needed to tame that inflation. Okay, 6 months ago, I did that. If you want, you can watch that video again. And today, Scotia Bank is coming out with the same analysis 6 months after. So Scotia Bank should have hired me instead. Anyway, jokes aside, so they're saying that out of that 5% overnight rate, which is set by Bank of Canada, 2% is just because of the government spending. And again, this is not just federal government, it is federal, municipal, provincial, all at all levels. So their fiscal spending is responsible for the 2% interest rate out of that 5% set by Bank of Canada. So if we did not have the fiscal spending, our overnight rate from Bank of Canada would have been at 3%. So that 2% extra rate that we are seeing right now, which we are paying in terms of our excess mortgage payments, it is to cover fiscal spending did by the government at all levels, federal, municipal, provincial. I would not blame Trudeau alone, it across all government levels. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So according to Financial Post, they are saying that when the aggressive rate hiking cycle started, it was at 0.25%. Now it is 5%. So we had 475 basis points increased since March 2022. Out of that, 70 bips is just because of the provincial spending. Okay, so the provincial government also did the spending, and 70 bips of that 475 basis point is just because of spending done by provincial government. Federal government is responsible for 30 bips of that rate. And then municipalities and other government levels are responsible for 20 bips of that rate. And the emergency funding program during COVID, which they hand out, free money to households and corporation owners, that contributed towards the 80 bips of the rate hiking cycle. Altogether, they make up to 200 basis points, which is 2% of that interest rate. So again, who's paying for that fiscal spending? It's us, taxpayer, especially the homeowners having the mortgages. So as we have seen, our mortgage payments have, tripled or quadrupled since March 2022, especially the ones having the variable interest rate. All of that extra interest payment that we are making, it's going to cover the fiscal spending done by all governments, not just federal, provincial, and municipal as well. Okay, and last week we saw that Tiff Macklem also pointed that out to the government ministers that their fiscal spending is making their job harder, because if they did not control that spending, the target to bring the inflation by 2% next year, it will be difficult, and unless they control the fiscal spending. So fiscal spending is the direct source of inflation, guys. I've been talking about on this channel that government spending is the number one source for inflation. If we did not have the deficit spending, we would have been in much better position. According to Keynesian economists, you can run deficit spending as long as you can control it and you produce GDP output accordingly. So since 2019, we have seen exponential rise in the fiscal spending, but we did not have the enough GDP growth to cover that, right? The anticipation was that perhaps that spending will stimulate the GDP growth over time, that it will balance it out. But now we have a big delta between the GDP growth and the fiscal spending that the government has been running, and it's not slowing down. It is not slowing down. Right now, the interest payment on the federal debt is $28 billion. Okay, and as per the projections provided by the government itself, it is approaching $50 billion in the next few years. $50 billion, which has been the maximum amount of interest we have ever paid going back to 1960s. So this is the level of the fiscal spending which is contributing directly into the inflation, and we need aggressive rate hiking cycle to tame that, which means indirectly it's us paying that, either in the form of taxes or inflation or in higher mortgage payments. Wait, there is more. The mortgage growth in Canada has been the lowest going back all the way to 2001. And this is because of the higher interest rate, the more restrictive monetary policy. So the financial conditions are getting much tighter. People are genuinely getting deleveraged. They are paying off their existing debt and they're not taking on any new debt because the debt is becoming so expensive. So if that continues, we'll see the mortgage growth is going to get even more restrictive, which is of course going to hurt GDP, because in a debt-driven economy, you need to have people to take more debt to consume services and produce GDP spending. Unfortunately, this is the principle of the Western economies, where everything comes with the help of the debt, but we are approaching at a point where the debt is not contributing towards the enough GDP growth. I think at some point this has to flush out. The higher interest rate and the tighter monetary cycle is needed to flush out this whole system so that we can come back to the sustainable debt to GDP levels, so that we can continue and maintain that going forward. But I'm just the guy on the internet talking about that. Our policymakers perhaps are not thinking about that, which is why we're seeing the projection on the government spending side. Anyway, you tell me what do you think about that. Put your comments down below. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you.